Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight on bystander intervention training. The University of Utah provides this training for students through a program called Check on Utah, Building Community Through Bystander Intervention. It empowers students to check on their community members and prevent harm from occurring. Joining us now live in studio to discuss this subject is Brittany Gleed, Director for Student Wellness at the University of Utah. Brittany, thanks for being here tonight and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Brittany, could you tell us a little bit more about the Check on Utah workshop? What do trainers discuss with participants and what skills do they gain?
Yeah, so Check on Utah is our bystander intervention program that we offer at the University of Utah. I will say in the last year we have given it quite the overhaul with a new name. We've added some really important pieces to the program, including having a really intentional conversation about things like bias and social norms, what it means when we're talking about harm and how do we intervene safely. The program, it's about 90 minutes, and the way we kind of break it up is we spend a big chunk of the time actually talking about how do we notice and interpret something as harmful, and then we move into more of the skill building pieces where we can talk with students about creative strategies to intervene and to support our community.
Now, most people think of bystander intervention as being the superhero that comes in and saves the day, but it's really much more than that, right? So how should we reframe and expand the idea of bystander intervention?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we think about bystander intervention, the idea of a superhero, coming in at the last moment is something that we all think of, which I think in an element of that is problematic because it makes intervening feel even more difficult for us. And so when we talk about expanding our idea of bystander intervention, what we're really talking about is expanding our idea of what harm is and kind of thinking about it a little bit more comprehensively beyond things that are, verbal and physical violence, but things like microaggressions or policy or comments. And not only expanding our definition of harm, but also learning how we disrupt harm and intervene along just a much broader time spectrum. And then lastly, kind of adding to this idea of intervention, including this idea of checking in and supporting each other so that we can kind of broaden the scope of how we actually support our community.
Now, intervening and interrupting harm when it takes place is actually harder than we think it may be, and it requires practice. Why is that?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think for most of us, we have been socialized to ignore especially low levels of harm as something that's not our business, something that we shouldn't interrupt. And, especially for many of us who hold some sort of a privileged identity, we have a lot of blinders on that really make it so we don't even notice harm in the first place. So it takes a lot of practice for us to actually raise our level of awareness to identify harm in the first place.
In your training, you use the Step Up model. What does that entail?
Yeah, so our Check on Utah program follows a step-up model. It's 5 separate pieces. We spend a lot of time actually talking about steps 1 and 2, which is noticing the problem and interpreting it. Because if we don't interpret something as a problem in the first place, practicing skills to intervene is not something that's actually going to be helpful. But after we've interpreted a problem, that's when we assume responsibility. We can then evaluate our role to determine, what we can do, what we can't do, and then finally is when we actually would step up and step in.
And what are the 5 Ds of bystander intervention?
Yeah, so we work with students to think about some creative options as far as how we can intervene and how we can do so safely. So talking about the 5 Ds, we're talking about something like discuss, which is truly a primary prevention strategy, where an example of that maybe is you're going to a gathering and you know that there's a possibility that someone might show up that you are uncomfortable with, and having that discussion with the people you're attending that party with and letting them know, hey, if this individual shows up, I would like for us to leave. So that would be an example of discuss. The other Ds are things like delegate. So this is an option if you're there with multiple people where you can kind of make a decision of, what would be the appropriate role for someone else to do as far as intervention. Would it be better for you to go and support the person that's being victimized? And some of the other Ds were, thinking about things like something more direct where we are actually calling attention to that harm. So this could be asking the individual who's being victimized, are you okay, or is there something that I can do? Or actually calling out the harm that's being caused by someone and letting them know that it's not okay what you're noticing. And the final 2 Ds would be something like distract, which we work with our students with some creative ideas. This could be something like the fake friend. So you notice something that's going on and it doesn't feel okay, but you don't feel comfortable fully stepping into a bystander interventionist role. So you might just approach that individual and pretend that you are a friend of theirs to disrupt the harm from occurring. So those are just a few of the options, but we get creative with our students to think about what would work for them in those situations.
Very good memory. I could tell that you've done several of these trainings and that, it's something that you know very well. Brittany, we have about 30 seconds left. I want to know, what are some situations where bystander intervention can be applied?
Truly, bystander intervention could be applied in so many moments during the day. I think that when we think about opportunities for us to actually practice bystander intervention, this could be in conversations with friends and family when an inappropriate comment is stated. It could be, seeing something on social media, and then it could also be just noticing something with a stranger. So there's truly opportunities throughout the day. Harm is being caused, unfortunately, all the time. And so it's really up to us to, raise our level of awareness and start paying attention so that we know when those opportunities come up for us to actually step in.
A lot to think about from this conversation. All right, you've been hearing from Brittany Gleed, Director for Student Wellness at the University of Utah. Brittany, thanks for coming on to the show to discuss this topic with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on anti-discrimination response training. This type of training is different than what you heard of in the last segment, but overall, it has similar goals to bystander intervention, aiming to educate and empower witnesses to act upon their role to reduce prejudice and discrimination. Joining us now live in studio is Irene Ota, certified anti-discrimination response trainer. She was a diversity coordinator and taught diversity and social justice classes for 20 years before retiring from the University of Utah. Irene, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for inviting me.
Irene, could you explain what anti-discrimination response training, or ART, is? Why does it not use the word bystander?
Because bystanders, it can be seen as passive, right? You're just standing by. Witness implies that you are witnessing, typically witness is connected to witnessing a crime. And so we want people to know how important it is, how devastating it can be to witness any kind of discrimination and prejudice, particularly for the receiver.
Now, what are some of the various forms of racial prejudice and discrimination that you talk about during your trainings?
Yeah, most people, when we say discrimination, automatically go to racism, but anti-discrimination response addresses racism, sexism, homophobia, ageism, classism, religious differences, those kind of things. So it runs a huge spectrum. And part of in the training, we actually discuss what those might look like, and we get really detailed.
Tell us about the discrimination triangle, the 3 components that shape the core.
Well, discrimination and stereotypes get created by a particular culture that then influence society, that then influences the systems, and then systems influence the culture, and culture can influence it just goes all the way around. And in the middle of this triangle is where the beliefs and attitudes, stereotypes, assumptions, stigmas actually get created. And it's a complex creation.
It reminds me of a formula or an equation that just makes up who someone is and why they think the way that they do. Now, what are the 4 levels of active witnessing and examples of each?
Well, there are 4 levels of witnessing. They're not all active. There's one that's diswitnessing. Diswitnessing is when you can ignore it, when you can say I don't see it, or when you join the perpetrator. Passive witnessing, so diswitnessing is like no see, no hear, no feel. Passive witnessing is that you're seeing it, you're hearing it, you're feeling it, but you don't do anything, you don't say anything because you're either afraid or you're hoping someone else will step up. Active witnessing is overt. You are seeing, hearing, feeling, and you're going to do something. You're going to say something or do something. And ethical witnessing with social action is going beyond hearing, seeing, and feeling, pushing it even further. And in active witnessing, in situations and circumstances, you don't always get to go to ethical witnessing.
Now let's talk about the active witnessing model. There are multiple parties involved directly or indirectly in the discrimination, and what are those?
Well, at the very top of the triangle is the witness and co-witnesses, and this is where we're at. The anti-discrimination response is geared for witnesses and co-witnesses, not necessarily for receivers, though receivers could use the responses. But this training is specifically targeting witnesses and co-witnesses, and that's why we're at the very top of this triangle. And we can observe the perpetrator or initiator, and we can observe the receiver. And at the bottom of the triangle is where the perpetrator is saying or doing something to the receiver. So this triangle doesn't move around. This triangle, when you're at the top, you are witnessing the receiver and the perpetrator, and then the perpetrator is harming the receiver.
A lot of good concepts here. All right, Irene, hold that thought. We have to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll resume our In Focus discussion on anti-discrimination response training. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on anti-discrimination response training. Before the break, we were joined by Irene Ota, certified anti-discrimination response trainer. We pick up now right where we left off. Irene, there are 11 active witnessing response categories. Could you help us quickly go through all of them?
Yes. Because participants vary, and it's up to the facilitator to decide which cards. There's like over 150 cards that we use for examples to get people started. And assertive interjections would be where you are more assertive in your response. Expressing personalized emotional reactions is where you might say something like, I'm feeling really uncomfortable, this makes me angry. Calling it racism or discrimination is very direct. You can say that sounds sexist to me, or that sounds homophobic to me. You can just say, I disagree. If someone says all certain immigrants are rapists and drug dealers, you can say, I disagree with that statement. It's that simple. You can question the validity of a statement or an overgeneralization by saying, where are you getting that information? I don't think that's quite true. You can point out the hurtful and offensive nature, and it can be as simple as an ouch. You can just say, ouch. Or again, point out that this is very hurtful. You can put the offender on the spot. This one I would be very careful about, particularly if you feel like it's a hostile, violent atmosphere. You can have empathetic confrontation. You can say something like, I can see that you're really angry. These kind of comments are sexist to me, and I'm really uncomfortable with it. But this empathetic confrontation comes first, like, you seem really upset, or if it's someone you know and you say, this is unlike you, why are these comments that are making me uncomfortable being said? And you can approach and support the victim. And it's interesting in the trainings, most people want to do a slam dunk against the perpetrator, and they forget that you can approach and support the receiver. I don't like calling it the person a victim, a receiver, by saying, as Brittany was saying, are you okay? Can I help you? Can we go get coffee? Whatever. And this is really important. Co-witnesses are just as important, if not more important, than witnesses. And if you're not getting co-witnesses, you can approach them, and there are comments like, does anyone else find this uncomfortable? Does anyone else see this? Approaching externals like teachers, administrations, and other third parties are more in the line of the ethical witnessing, where you are moving towards some resolution, some sort of resolution, additional training, change in policy, etc.
So many great tips and categories there that we can use, right, in all sorts of scenarios. Now, Irene, what are some circumstances where anti-discrimination response training could be applied?
Well, again, many. When you hear microaggressions or implicit bias statements, even when it's overt, It can be used. It's any time that you see, hear, or feel that something is wrong, that there is discrimination, that there is prejudice, that there is something hurtful going on, that's when anti-discrimination response should be able to kick in. And you have to be really brave to do it. It's not, as Brittany said, this is not easy. For people who think this is going to be a silver bullet, once I'm trained, I can, I'll do this all the time. It doesn't happen that way.
Right, even after 7 hours with you, right? Then you still have to take all of that information and then identify how to apply that in real life. I know it takes practice. Now, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, the first 3 hours of the training is about laying a foundation of understanding and concepts and the expectations of the training. The last 3 hours are actually using anti-discrimination response, using scenarios.
Right, so at least you put them in certain situations so they can implement that with each other. Okay, well, I'd like to address the incident that happened Monday in New York City where a 65-year-old Asian American woman was violently attacked. This was the jumping off point for our discussion tonight. The perpetrator could be seen in the surveillance video stomping on her head multiple times, and there's several people nearby who just watched without intervening in any way. Then you see one of the employees here just go and shut the door as if like they wanted nothing to do with it. So let's dissect this situation. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think there was a lot of fear there because the individual is very violent, right? Unprovoked, very violent. But here is where co-witnesses are really important, right? If many people came out and said, "Stop it, what are you doing?" that would be more powerful than one person, right, who would be very vulnerable. And then for someone not to go and see if this woman needed help is devastating. An active witness would get into this situation because you would be compelled to. One of the statements we make in the anti-discrimination training is that we need to be aware that discrimination and prejudice of any kind is hurtful. It's hurtful mentally, it's hurtful physically, it's hurtful economically, it's hurtful in so many ways, and that we need to be compelled to respond.
Now, Irene, taking this all that we've discussed in this conversation and bringing it back home, at the end of the day, what are the benefits of the anti-discrimination response training?
Okay, well, awareness is one. Knowing a variety of responses to use in different situations and circumstances is another. Building a sense of community, particularly again when I talk about witnesses and co-witnesses particularly, building a community of people who will respond with you, who will support you as a witness is very important. And with the scenarios, you are there, you are a witness. Hopefully you will be able to practice being able to recognize and respond.
A lot of good information for us to all ingest and internalize tonight. Irene, final words. What would you like to leave our viewers with tonight?
Be brave. Be brave, and also remember, be a co-witness. Co-witnessing is so important. No one likes to be the only one that says anything or does anything. It's so vulnerable and scary. So co-witnessing is very, very important. I stress that a lot in the trainings.
All right, you've been hearing from Irene Ota, certified anti-discrimination response trainer. Irene, thanks for condensing all of this great information in just a matter of 12 minutes. We appreciate you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.